Bulavinak, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome, of course, or acknowledge the President of the Minister for Commerce, Trade, Tourism and Transport, His Excellency, the French Ambassador, the President of Fiji Chamber of Commerce, Women in Business, Fiji Commerce and Employees Federation, and of course the President of the Fiji Institute of Accountants, Mr. Nitesh Lau. Please excuse me, my apologies for the delay. I had to go and give business to BSP last night and get 2 injections so I could be here this morning, which of course, in fact, contextualizes why we are here and why there's been so much emphasis being given to this particular budget because of the situation we are in. Essentially, the world is gripped by this pandemic. This pandemic has essentially put the world on its head. We've never had such a situation where borders have closed in real terms overnight. Planes have stopped flying overnight. The way that we interact with each other, even with our loved ones, has also changed dramatically and in a very phenomenal manner. So obviously these sorts of measures that have been essentially driven by the fact that we need to look after our individual health has had an enormous impact on how we not only interact with each other interpersonally, but also in respect of how we interact with each other vis-a-vis trade, commerce, traveling, tourism, how we manufacture, where we manufacture, should we manufacture at all, how we actually use goods, what goods should we use. All of that has been completely changed. Normally these sorts of changes, fundamental structural changes, take over a period of time. Many would argue take decades, where there's the WTO rules that take decades, we still have not resolved a number of those issues. Customs tariffs, your line items, etc., they take decades to actually change. The world has actually had to deal with this situation within a matter of months. So your response has to be contextualized within that framework. And of course, the science is ever changing. As I've said now, I'm kind of getting a bit of deja vu because I see some people in this forum that were in the previous forum that I was on Thursday. So I may be repeating myself. But before this, when this pandemic, I should say, was started, before it was even declared a pandemic, we were told that the children were the most vulnerable, and therefore you have to protect children. Now we are being told that children are the least vulnerable, so it's okay. So the scientists themselves, the medical experts themselves are learning new things every day about this particular virus. How it, the gestation period, how long does it stay within your system before it actually outwardly manifests itself, how long can you carry it for. All those areas have still not been actually finalized, nor do we know. We don't actually have a vaccine yet. We could have a vaccine in 2 years' time, we could have a vaccine maybe in 3 months' time, who knows? But of course, these sorts of uncertainties are the only predictable things within this framework. The most certain thing about COVID-19 is the uncertainty it presents. That's it. We don't know what else will happen. We of course, however, should not then there be sitting around twiddling our thumbs waiting for things to change. What we should be doing is rather anticipating what can happen, using this opportunity to try and look at our own fundamental structures as a global economy and of course as a domestic economy. Because we need to position ourselves. We already are seeing signs of how people are positioning themselves. So when we were formulating this budget, we had to take all of this within context. We of course had to recognize the fact within our new framework that Fiji actually has done really well as far as the containment of the virus is concerned. We don't have any active cases in Fiji and therefore we are what we call COVID-contained country. Hopefully, New Zealand will become a COVID-contained country very soon. Now, when you become COVID-contained, you then have the freedom, the liberty to be able to, propose new changes. Look at how we can open up the economy. If you look at Australia, Victoria is now in a lockdown. Just about a week ago, and this is obviously when we made certain announcements a few weeks ago, this was not the situation. Now there are certain suburbs in Sydney that are actually in lockdown. I understand, your southwest suburbs, or western southwest suburbs like Liverpool, or your Campbelltowns and what have you. Yesterday I met a gentleman at actually the hospital when I was there, and they needed to do a medical emergency flight, a medevac. And they said, we want to transport their father to a hospital in Sydney. I said, well, are they taking him to a, lockdown area? Is the hospital in a lockdown area? Because these are the kind of things you take into consideration. Some weeks back when, we had, unfortunately, one of the industry leaders who passed away, when he had to be evacuated, the whole issue was whether the hospitals over there would accept somebody from Fiji. Because, some hospitals weren't actually up to speed with the COVID-19 status of Fiji. So these are all new sort of, issues in play. But the fact of the matter is that because Fiji is now COVID contained, it gave us a bit more latitude to be able to reach out to the rest of the world. So by a very short background, that's how we actually, that's the framework we use to be able to develop a new framework for our budget. Because of the fact that, a lot of the fundamentals have actually changed, there is absolutely no business for government as far as we are concerned regarding revenue in certain areas. Obviously, it gives an opportunity to re-look at the revenue streams. Normally, when you are sort of, making a bit of money through a particular taxation tariff or tax, and if you suddenly cut that off, then it will have an immediate impact into your revenue collection. But if that's already dried up and there's nothing happening there, it gives you the ability to deal with it a lot better. This is why when we had the first case of COVID-19, within a week we presented the COVID-19 budget response. Because we knew, we didn't want to sort of sit around and saying, okay, let's see what happens, because we knew the moment you have your COVID-19 case, tourists would stop flying, would come into Fiji, would stop coming to Fiji, planes would stop flying. So enormous impact. The ability to collect departure tax, ECAL, STT, revenue for hotels, revenue for Fiji Airways, and all the other businesses, what we call the ancillary businesses that are linked to those businesses, even right down to the person, as I said the other day, who maybe have a small mithai stall outside Fiji Airways office, they sell to the staff. Or the lady, who sells bananas or boils EV and sells EV outside those offices. He or she no longer will have any business because there's nobody working there. So it'll affect them too, and dramatically. And these people aren't necessarily in the formal sector. They don't have FNPF. They don't have anything they can rely on. That's the day-to-day living. So suddenly they don't have any revenue. They don't have any money. Because some of these people actually may be making a sale today that may be their meal for tonight or maybe their breakfast for tomorrow. So this is why we actually completely regurgitated our figures, recalibrated, to take us up till this financial year, or the end of this financial year, which is the new financial year coming from the 1st of August. So when we looked at it, we obviously said, okay, well, Fiji is now COVID contained. We can now offer ourselves as a tourist destination, in particular to Australia and New Zealand, because we can say to them that, look, we are safe. We can say to them that because we rely or we actually have confidence in your health systems, we can accept your citizens to come to Fiji as tourists under certain conditions. Now, that'll be a very different situation because we won't make that kind of offer, for example, at this point in time to USA. The situation is very different there. But because we have a close collaboration with Australia and New Zealand, we do a lot of trade, a lot of us have been educated there, our health officials, we got them to start talking to each other. So the professor, for example, who is the advisor to the New Zealand government from the University of Otago, has been speaking to Dr. James Fong, Dr. Alicia Sokhan. We have the Australian Medical, the head of Australian Medical Office in Australia talking again to those individuals. So there's a lot of talk going on, in the background as to what we can do, what are the protocols. There's also been some learnings, obviously, and a lot of the learnings, in fact, have been the manner in which we have very successfully managed our quarantine. Recently there was an episode in Melbourne. That's why they had one of the outbreaks, because they were keeping people in quarantine in hotels, but they decided to use private security firms to manage those quarantine facilities. So then, whether people were paid off or whether people just felt sorry for them, the security guards were letting the spouses in during the night time. So they obviously, were mixing around with people who had COVID-19, went back into the community, and there was an outbreak. Our COVID-contained facilities, the quarantine facilities, have been managed by the RFA from day one. They won't allow you to do that. So now you'll see that some of the quarantine facilities are actually replicating that, even in Australia now. They're using the security agencies to be able to manage quarantine facilities. We were very quick in our lockdowns. Lautoka was locked down, Suva was locked down, we had various parts in Vanuatu being locked down. They were done for good reason. I know some people actually, complaining about it at that point in time, but now we're bearing the fruits of that decisive decision that we did make. So now you're walking around, you're not wearing masks, nobody in Fiji has COVID-19, apart from those people in quarantine. So we then, of course, as the Honourable Prime Minister announced some weeks back, we offered the Bula Bubble. So just very quickly, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, the Bula Bubble, essentially the way it works is that because of the confidence we have in the New Zealand and Australian systems, we've said that you can, if an Australian visitor wants to come to Fiji for a holiday, they go into their 14-day quarantine. They can do that at home. They have a COVID-19 test. If it's negative within 48 hours, they jump on a plane, they come to Nandi Airport. They'll be separated from everybody else, or others arriving from different destinations, because we don't want cross-contamination. Well, not cross-contamination, contamination from one to the other. And then they don't get off at the airport and catch a taxi or catch whatever they want, or some friend cannot come and pick them up. There'll be designated transport along what we call the VIP lanes. They'll go to designated resorts. They'll put up their hand to be part of the Bula Bubble. And when they go to these resorts, they simply stay at those resorts. Most of them do in any case. They stay at the resorts under normal circumstances. They stay at the resorts, and they have their 7-day holiday, 5-day holiday, whatever it is. Then they go back out of through the designated transportation system in the airport out to Australia. Of course, the staff that will be servicing them at those resorts will need to stay on premises. They simply cannot come to work in the morning, in the evening go back to the village or go back to their home or go back to the suburbs, because there is some chance of contamination. So we've created the resort as a bubble, we've created the transportation system as a bubble, and of course the airport is a bubble. That's what we've offered. And we are now in a lot of conversations. I've just had a correspondence with the Australian Minister who we've been dealing with just on Thursday. So there are discussions going on. The question though is, and that's why we're having these discussions, is how will the Australian government, well, first of all, they have to allow people to come, and secondly, how will they treat their citizens when they go back to Australia or go back to New Zealand? Because if they will say to them, you go back and go into quarantine, in compulsory quarantine, then somebody will say, well, it's not actually worth it. It's not worth it for me to come to Fiji, because I still have to go into this compulsory quarantine. So that's some of the things that we are negotiating. The Australians have said they don't want to actually come and contaminate us. What we are saying is that under those conditions, we believe that we'll be able to manage that health risk. Because for us, it's a management of your health risk vis-a-vis the management of your economic risk and economic opportunities. New Zealand, of course, if it I understand in a week's time or so under the definition, would probably become COVID contained unless there's no sort of outbreak in the community or any case. If they become COVID contained, then the ability of people to travel between New Zealand and Fiji becomes a lot more relaxed, and we will accept them. And at this point in time, our announcement was, as long as they do they don't have to go into self-quarantine, etc. They simply do a COVID-19 test. 48 hours prior to that, if they are, 48 or 72 hours, if they are, then they come on the plane. They can get off the airport, go and catch a taxi, catch the bus, go to the resort of their choice, but not the designated ones. We have the Bulla bubble. And holiday, spend the money and go back. We also, of course, have the blue lanes that we propose. The blue lanes essentially allows for yachts, etc., and super yachts to come to Fiji. The period of their sail becomes the quarantine period. So if you are going to leave Auckland Harbour and it takes about 5 to 7 days to get to Fiji and nobody gets on or off from the point of your departure to the point of your arrival, assuming you come in a small yacht, it takes, say, 7 days. You still have another 7 days to serve to make up the 14 days. The area from Port Dinar to Wailoaloa, Bay Area has been designated as a quarantine space. So they are monitored by health officials, by the RFMF. And they serve the 7 days, they do the COVID-19 test. If it's negative, then they can roam around. We've already got a few yachts that have already come in. We've been informed we're expecting another over 100 yachts to come through. So that's that one. The other one, of course, we've got opportunities for individuals who may want to come, pay for their own quarantine facilities, pay for the RFMF services, and they go to designated areas where they can be kept under quarantine, and once they've served the quarantine period, then they're okay. So we've got a few high net worth individuals who've done that. We similarly have made the offer to some of the well-known film productions like Survivor, etc. The last one that we have also offered is what we call the Pacific Pathway. And we said as part of this, we allowing Tuvalu, Kiribati, and Tonga to be part of the Pacific Pathway. But for them, if they want to come to Fiji, they have to go into quarantine, compulsory quarantine facilities in Fiji. They have to pay for that 14 days. Because there's obviously certain type of health risks that our officials have assessed. And they believe that is at this point in time necessary. Because please understand that we are the only independent state in the Pacific that has WHO certified testing facilities. The others that are in the Pacific are, of course, French territories like New Caledonia and Tahiti. But no other independent Pacific Island state has that, at least in the Southern Pacific. So this gives us a lot more credibility. So this is the issue. The issue, of course, in terms of if you look at some of the raw determinants, is the psychology of where we are. What is our credibility vis-a-vis the health status that we have? What is our brand as a country, and how can we take advantage of that? Understanding also that we can't be sitting around twiddling our thumbs and waiting to react to when certain positive changes take place. That's the other aspect. The other one, of course, was what can we do to spur confidence within the business sector, in the informal sector, and also to be able to spur domestic investment, which is not necessarily dependent directly at this point in time on the tourism numbers escalating. So, for example, if you look at the government capital expenditure, we have provided funding for capital investments in projects that are what we're calling ready-to-shovel projects. So the environmental impact assessment has been done, all the other checks have been done, the designs, the engineering, services, service engineering, everything's been done. We're just ready to call for tenders and ready for the works to start. So we have the CWM Maternity Hospital, the new wing. That's going to start. The tenders are going to be called. We have about 3 or 4 stations. Some of them are already actually in construction, but we are now going to expedite it. Because the thinking was at one point in time, if the funds aren't going to be available, we'll slow down the construction phase, or speed, I should say. So now it's going to be escalated. The Prime Minister's office has been parked for a number of years. All the groundwork has been done. So this will literally, on the ground, create hundreds of jobs. The people coming, digging foundation, laying the cement, plaster, tiling, painting, as it escalates. Even just with the police stations and some of the other projects, CWM included in the Prime Minister's, we're looking at about a $60–70 million injection into the economy within the 1 year, which is good. Now, we have also then said we need to be able to spur confidence or incentivize the private sector to invest. Of course, there are a couple of ways you do that. One of them is the psychology. A lot of the people that we know, businesses in Fiji, are actually cashed up. They do have a bit of cash. The cost of construction actually has gone down compared to, say, 2–3 years ago. So there are opportunities there. So what do we do? The first one, the psychology role, is because the business person needs to feel that, okay, there's been a lot of changes in terms of the removal of bureaucracy, etc. So as highlighted, we removed stamp duty completely. It's gone. And I see many people still can't understand or can't grapple with the idea of stamp duty is gone because it's been so much part of our lives. Like business licenses. They started during the colonial days. Most of these things started during the colonial days. And we simply, when we became independent, we kind of continued with it. We tweaked with it, we increased it. But nobody really gave it a good fundamental assessment of it. So we've got rid of it. Of course, we've looked at some immediate impacts, like, for example, departure tax has been halved from 200 to 100. As mentioned by the President of the Fiji Chamber, the STT is gone completely. ECAL has been reduced from 10% to 5%. We need to have ECAL. Just because we've got COVID-19, we're dealing with this pandemic, does not mean the cyclones will stop. Does not mean that the sea waters aren't rising. We have over 40 villages to relocate to higher ground. In the middle of all of this, we in the pandemic crisis, when we were locked down, we had to go and supply, give relief supplies, to Kandavu and Lao, and to be able to manage relief supplies under the COVID-19 situation was very difficult. It can be costly too. You have to be worried about things like, contamination from the boats, etc. So ECAL needs to stay there. And then, of course, we've provided a number of reliefs. For example, VAT reversible charges have been gone. It's gone now. There's some tweaking that will take place on it to ensure that only those who are VAT registered will be eligible for that. And then, of course, we've over 1,600 items, the tariff rates have been reduced. Some have completely gone, and most of them have come down to simply 5%. Now, why did we do that? Number of reasons. One of them, of course, it gave us the ability to look at the tariff structures. The way that, for example, our tariff structure was put in place, it was not very sophisticated, I have to say. It was not nuanced. It did not actually take into account, for example, the market in itself. I'll give you an example. We have what we call protection rates for fish, tin fish, tuna, because we have a factory in Ovalau. We have one factory also here in Lodala Beach Estate that essentially brings fish from overseas, but cans it and then sells it to the local population. So we say, okay, we've got to protect this. But within the fish category, there are many other types of fish that we don't actually deal anything or have anything to do with. Salmon, sardines, and other sort of seafood products that we don't manufacture or that we don't produce, that we don't can. So why do we need protection for that? Why are we depriving the ordinary Fijian from having a cheaper, or I should not cheaper, but having an inexpensive pricing mechanism for those types of products? Why should only the rich be able to buy a tin of salmon? Right. So these are the ways that we've looked at many of the structures. There are some, of course, businesses that continue to get what we call protection, where we have imposed the continuation of 32% protection is there. Some used to have 32% protection plus fiscal protection, or excise duty protection, sorry. So it went up to about 45, 49%. Now many of these Fijian businesses, some of them have become very inefficient. They've actually entered into price gorging. So even though the item that's imported from overseas has got a huge level of duties they have to pay, whereas the guy who sort of gets the protection locally, the prices, if you look at it, sometimes there's not much difference. So the consumers are actually losing out. Many of the hotels, one of the major problems or matters have been identified with our tourism sector is that our F&B is very expensive. Food and beverage is very expensive. You buy a stubby for $12, $15 at some of the hotels. A bottle of mineral water that you can buy in the supermarket for $1.50, the same bottle of water is being sold for $12, $15 in the hotel. It's crazy. I can go down to the beach in Bali and buy a stubby for $2. A bowl of fries for $1.50. And even though some people may say, well, the guys in Bali don't get paid that much, that's not necessarily always very true. Nor does it have such a huge component of the cost structure that you have to jack it up that much. So we looked at many of these things. So about 1,600 items, things like washing detergents. At some point in time, somebody in Fiji, used to bring in some sort of very basic soap material and then package it and say we make washing detergent. But that's no longer the case. So the duty has remained at 32. It's been now brought down to 5. Everybody should be able to buy affordable washing detergent. Toothbrushes, 15% duty. Why? We want our kids and you to have clean teeth. You should be able to change your toothbrushes on a regular basis, not keep it for the next 3 months. So those are the things that we've looked at. It also has an impact on the cost structure for the hotel sector and individually for ordinary Fijians. So that's what we did. There's of course other incentives, and a lot of you here are business people, and I wanted to sort of highlight those to you. So for example, in the medical industry, whilst we're still going ahead with a public-private partnership with Aspen Hospital in Lautoka, it was delayed because for obvious reasons. We are also talking and working with the Australian government through the Australian Infrastructure Finance Facility Program to be able to give us access in terms of some of the funding from there. And we hope to have that progress, and Aspen should, as per our recent discussions, start running those Lautoka and Ba hospitals from August, or at the latest from August of next year. Which will of course mean that there should be a particular level of medical services that will increase in Fiji, the quality of it, not just quality, but also the range of tertiary care facilities. But nonetheless, we're not just simply depending on that. If there are other people that want to set up, for example, what we call ancillary services, if somebody wants to come along and, for example, set up an MRI machine facility, X-rays and other diagnostics, they can do that. If they make particular level investments, they get various years of tax holidays, ranging all the way up to, I think, 10 to 13 years. Similarly with the hospitals too, anybody else can set up a hospital. We've had a huge focus in respect of subdivision of lots. The rate of home ownership in Fiji is extremely low. Many people also get into they think psychologically that they can only buy a house, once in their 30s or 40s. We want the young people of Fiji to be able to buy their homes much quicker. And have that, obviously, it means a couple of things. One is that the banks are playing ball. The Reserve Bank, for example, is playing ball. They're lending at 1% for housing loans to the commercial banks, who should not then lend for more than 5% those monies. So we have banks that are now lending at 4.2, 4.3% for home loans. This is for first home buyers. Secondly, is that the psychology of owning a home. Most people in Fiji, when they say you want to own a home, they think a block of land and a building in the middle of it. But owning your first home can also be under strata title. You can have your apartment, which is your own. You have it for 99 years in the same way that you will have a home on a block of land. And that, obviously, the cost structure for strata titling is a lot more attractive because you have only one roof, you have 3 floors, you share the plumbing services, etc. So we want to get people into that space. The third aspect, of course, is availability of lots. And again, we've said that any company, any business that subdivides land for, from beginning from $1 million or less. You get X number of benefits. You also then, any profits that you make from the sale of the subdivision of those lots are tax-free or tax-exempt. And so the larger the project, the longer the tax holidays you get. And also you get exemption on the profits that you make from it. So that's very attractive. We've also then said that if you're a small business, we know a couple of cases where people have started a company started a chicken farm in Ba, and they're doing quite well. But now they want to go into full commercial, or at least increase the size. They require much greater voltage of electricity. But EFL will come along and say, well, hang on, you need to fork out $80,000 for a substation or getting three-phase power. So a lot of these people cannot afford it. So government is going to pay it for them, and government gets sort of reimbursed when EFL gives out those funds or reimburses them. So that, and we've also spoken to EFL, even for all businesses now, because previously EFL's way of dealing with that was, if they say you need to give us $300,000 to build a substation, you have to pay us up front. There was necessarily no timeline given as to when they would do it by. So now, got an arrangement with EFL where EFL will only start, getting or asking for the money as on a progressive basis, as and when it's being built. So we've got the subdivision. We also have with the building of public rental housing. Again, very attractive. Any rental income that you make from that, it's also all tax exempt. If you get into partnerships, so we want to build a very nice complex of offices in Lautoka for all government offices. Currently, they're strewn all across the city. You want to have nice quality, maybe have a coffee shop downstairs, make government service a lot more attractive, etc. So we are going to go out to tender for that. So any private company that wants to build it according to our standards and our specifications, they get various concessions and tax holidays, but also any profit that they make from the rental is also will become tax exempt. So we put all that out to try and create private sector investment opportunities. So that's by way of background. On the overall government expenditure itself, you'll see some ministries have had expenditure cuts. It's of course not very easy to cut many of the government services. The government still needs to run. Of course, you can become a lot more smarter in the way you manage those funds. You can have a lot more efficiencies, and this is why you'll see, for example, our spending on the Digital Fiji project is still there. One of the problems we do have, for example, if the French ambassador comes tomorrow and says to me, I want to help all small businesses, and I want to help all those people who run, canteens from their home. I hope he does do that, but, but I cannot give him exact data. If he says I want to help all the home canteens in the Central Division, I don't have that data at this point in time that I can sort of give to him just like that. So one of the things that we are obviously doing is the digitalization program will continue. And we need to have that data. In the same way, you saw that we made an announcement about the National Identification Card. We will go ahead with the project. There's no allocation made specifically for in this year's project. Will definitely be next year, because we need that type of information to, for example, a better delivery of social welfare services, better collection of data. And we're continuing with some of these projects. So, again, ease of doing business becomes a lot more better. Ease of delivering government services also becomes a lot better. So Ministry of, for example, Poverty Alleviation, Women and Children is getting increased funding. We've had some assistance by the Australian government where they have given us additional funding to top it up for 3 months. They've also provided some funding because they did not have a very good management system about all those people receiving social welfare. So you'll see some increased funding. The police have actually received additional funding. We're funding the phase 2 of the project, which is the upgrade of or modernization of the Fijian police force. It allows for about over 130 new recruits. Special constables are being made into regular or police officers. About over 200 of them are getting, They're moving up in the next position, so you obviously need funding for that. The health, of course, is getting a lot of funding too, which includes the nurses or intern nurses will become regular nurses. A lot of doctors are becoming, they finish the internship and they'll become regular doctors. A doctor in Fiji, they start earning about $45,000 as an intern. The moment they finish their 1 year of internship, the salary goes up to $63,000. So that's a huge jump. But what we have done is that we've said now doctors need to serve 2 years of internship because there is a feel and also feedback from the public. The internship needs to be longer so people get much better exposure. And of course, like forestry has got some increased funding because of the fact that there's a lot of pine out in the outer islands. They need to be harvested and to help give people direct access to timber. So we're putting a lot of emphasis on machinery. Agriculture has an increase of over $3 million. Some strategic investments we've done. So for example, their labs, their testing abilities to do so, and also specifically targeted crops where the research, the outreach, the extension services actually has been also increased in that way to getting productivity. There's a lot of people saying, oh, you should have given, $50, $60 million for agriculture, but how will you spend that? You need to, of course, build capacity in people. People need to have the know-how to be able to actually go out and do farming. There are a lot of people who've taken to backyard gardening, which is great. But you also have to be mindful that sometimes people tend to go for the same crops. So a person who's been selling, a bundle of long beans for $2, and suddenly they're selling for 50 cents, people get disenchanted by it. A lot of people will fall off. So you've got to make sure that the market mechanics is working well too. So those kind of strategic fundings have been allocated to different ministries. The FNPF will continue to remain at 5% till January 2021, because of course a lot of businesses have issues. There are a lot of people who are still unemployed. We want people to be re-employed. However, what we have said is that any employer that wants to pay more than 5% to the employee, any amount they pay, more than 5%, but kept at 10%, they'll get 150% tax deduction on that additional amount they pay. So those of you who are still employing people, if you want to look after your employees, we're giving you an opportunity to do so, whilst not necessarily forking everything out from your pocket. So we've done those kind of tweaks around it. We've also, for example, said those students who were educated through the TELS program, they're now working. We have obviously said the loan repayments are deferred. That'll now continue till the end of next year, because we appreciate that some of those students who are former students who are now working, if they're still working, obviously they would be supporting other people. So we give them that opportunity to do so. Of course, if you're a TELS student, you're working but unemployed, you don't do your repayments, because you can't do your repayments whilst you are unemployed. So I'll stop there, because there's quite a lot of things that I can talk about. The other main thing is that I wanted to highlight is, again, it sort of feeds into the construction sector, but also fulfills our goals and objectives in respect of getting people to own their own homes. And we've said that we will now, anybody that earns less than $50,000 a year, household that earns less than $50,000 a year, if they are going to build their first home, government will give a grant of $30,000 towards the construction of their home. If they're going to buy their own home, $15,000. If you earn more than $50,000 but less than $100,000 to build your first home, we give a grant of $20,000, but to buy is $5,000. Why is that this disparity? Is because we obviously want more people to build homes. We need to increase the stock of homes in Fiji. And that also will be applicable if people start buying strata title. We can give that same type of grants to them. But they have to go through a financial institution. They have to go through a bank, because that's how we can manage the funds. And then of course they can access 50% of their funds if they're buying the first home or building the first home through FNPF. That's critically important for us as an overall objective. The idea, therefore, if I can sort of summarize it, is that we pre-positioning ourselves. You know, Phuket is already advertising $99 for 5 nights. They're probably throwing meals with it too. So what we have done also is that one important line item that I forgot to mention, we worked with Fiji Airways and we're offering $60 million. So Fiji Airways will work with any resort that wants to work with it, that we offer a package. So the package must mean, even before the taxes actually came down, so obviously it got cheaper too, the hotels must at least reduce their rates by 45% at least. And Fiji Airways will also reduce their rates, and you get a package. People pay now, they can travel later. And so we've allocated $60 million. So from government side, we will pay $400 per tourist that enters Fiji under that package. And it's for the first 150,000 tourists. Now, the beauty about it is, apart from the government is helping, the beauty about it is that I can, if I'm an Australian, for example, I've been traveling all these years, say, to Outrigger Hotel, and if I've been paying, you know, $1,000, and now suddenly I can get to Fiji and have my accommodation for $500, I know the product, I know the people, I regularly travel there, and I say, wow, this is great. I want to go back to the Outrigger at this price. So I'll buy it now, but I'll travel in November next year, you know, because I don't know how this thing is going to pan out. And they're also eligible to have that deferred further. You know, God forbid, if Australia is still under lockdown by November of next year, if they want to defer it, or, you know, if it does not fit in with the work schedule, then they can defer it again. But the fact is, Fiji Airways will get the cash now. Outrigger will get the cash now. There are many hotels that are empty, but they still have to pay $3, $4, $5 million in insurance premiums. So insurance is not going to stop. In the same way, the rising waters won't stop just because of this pandemic. So we have to ensure that they get cashed up. We only pay the rebate once the tourist sets foot in Fiji. So that's one of the things we've done. So overall, the idea is to pre-position ourselves, and then, of course, we are able to put in place all these measures that builds up confidence. We are able to assist the tourism sector. The reality of the matter is, some people are saying, you know, we should be looking at other industries. Yes, we are actually, and there's some other, which I'll hopefully announce later. If you don't talk too much about it, you can ask me questions on that. But we still depend on tourism. FNPF owns 4 or 5 hotels. This is owned by FNPF. Holiday is owned. Marriott, Intercontinental, Sheraton, Westin. They're major investments. We can't just say, let's pull the plug on the tourism sector. So we have to still support the tourism sector. Then we, of course, offering other incentives in other areas. For example, domestic construction, etc. And also giving people overall the boost. My departing words would be this. We, of course, receive a lot of positive feedback. Some of the media organizations are being really stupid, actually, in the way that the analyses are being carried out. I find it quite embarrassing intellectually, the type of stories that are coming out in Fiji Times and all these other joke publications, where they're only simply just looking at 1 or 2 things without even talking to us. They are not looking at the overall big picture. They think it's normal. Everything is normal. It's not normal. Believe you me, it's not normal. One of the things that we are fighting on internationally is saying, look guys, when the vaccine is developed, we want the first bite of the cherry also. Give us a pre-positioning, not only the rich guys, not because, you know, EU, for example, has given a few $100 million for the development of the vaccine. We should not be left out because we are the most vulnerable. We get cyclones, we are small, we are subject to global, you know, machinations in respect to geopolitical considerations, economic considerations. If assuming tomorrow there is a vaccine, and you have only certain countries that get the vaccine and we don't get it, we'll become even more disenfranchised. So what we are saying that the vaccine needs to be treated as a social good, not a commodified good. There's a whole world of difference between that. And our position is this: we want the economy to run. We'd rather get the economic shackles being taken off than not depend on aid. Aid is actually psychologically demoralizing too if you keep continuously become, you know, aid dependent. It does not actually build up your own personal capacity as an individual and also as a country. We've got 70% of the population is below the age of 40. Any right-minded media organization, any economic or political commentator needs to look at the big picture, needs to say that all these young people's potential must be realized. And you can do well as a country. Look at the big picture. So it is actually quite, frankly, a new space that we all must think outside the box. So our position has been that we provide the right fundamentals, reignite the confidence. And a lot of people have done well from this 10-year of unbroken growth period. Australia had 600,000 people becoming unemployed in 1 month. The debt to GDP ratio is shot through the roof. However, countries like Australia can get access to monies at very cheap interest rate. The Reserve Bank of Australia recently bought bonds from the Australian government at 0.08%. 0.08%. The bankers' heads are already spinning. You can imagine that's the cost of their funds. Yes, we have actually borrowed now money from, and I'll get Shiri to talk about this later. We have got the Japanese that have given us loans at 0% interest rate. Paid over a 40-year period, 10-year grace period. We've got somebody else. Shiri, was that under the IMF? No, the World Bank one. World Bank under IDA funds. We've been fighting for the past 4 or 5 years. And again, these people who are the critics don't understand this because they can't see the wood from the trees. We were declared a middle-income country. And therefore, they said we could not get concessional loans. We have been presenting all sorts of papers, attending various meetings for the past 3 or 4 years. And finally, the World Bank recognized what we said was our vulnerability. And our vulnerability was subject to climatic changes. Cyclone Winston wiped off 1/3 of the value of our GDP in 36 hours. In 36 hours. So we said we are therefore vulnerable, and our ability to bounce back after such an event makes us or drops us into that category where we need to get concessional funding. So they've now given us concessional funding. So we're getting IDA funds at 0%. There are other organizations we're borrowing from at 1 to 2%, 1.5%. So we've restructured our loans. So these are the sort of ways that we've dealt with it. We've of course now pumping in more foreign debt as opposed to domestic debt because we need more foreign debt to keep our reserve levels high. So all these traders you see sitting over there, your Moti buys and other companies that are here, when they buy goods from overseas, we need foreign currency. If we don't have foreign currency, then obviously your rating goes down. So in order to maintain the foreign currency levels at a particular rate, we need to ensure that we get foreign currency coming in. It of course helps with the liquidity, new money is being injected into the economy, so it also helps drive interest rates down. Organizations like FNPF, the best place for them to invest at this point in time is in government bonds. You can forget your investments offshore. Nobody's going to give you the rate of return that government gives. A lot of the banks are now interested in investing with us too, buying our bonds, buying our T-bills, because the government is the most secure form of actually earning money from your investments. So this is the overall picture. And the idea is that we spur that. We need to have a collaborative approach. This is why I'd like to round off now. I'd like to thank WIB, Institute of Accountants, the Chamber of Employees Federation, for participating with, of course, FCCI, because this is a great initiative. And I've suggested to FIA, and I hope the President does do that, is that they are helping us, for example, do the assessment for those people who've applied for these micro, small, and medium enterprises. I've suggested to them, why don't you make the work you're going to do in this become a regular feature of providing services. Your accountants who are working there, it goes towards your points. In the legal fraternity, every year you have to earn 10 points if you attend certain sessions. Or if you go and do some legal aid work, you can get those points. I said, the accountants can do that now. We need to take collaborative approach because these people are your potential clients. Your potential clients. You've got to handhold people. And we obviously currently are looking at, modernizing the Fijian Institute of Accountants Act, which is, sort of right in the dungeons of the past. And we need to bring it back to life and make it more relevant. So please, I think a collaborative approach is very, very important. And please understand that it's not a return to the norm. It's a return, not even return, it's the new norm we're trying to set. And we have to understand, I'd like to, of course, thank all the people actually who behind the scenes worked with us, including the Governor of the Reserve Bank. We have the FRCS team here, people like Shalini who can read any code number to you now, back of her hand, not a back of her hand, in the mind. Shiri is here also, who heads fiscal planning, and all the other members of the team that are here. You have Fazrul, you have the others that are here, that have worked behind the scenes, and of course my life with the FRC has become a lot easier too, from that perspective, doing the tariff structures, because they also realize the fact that there's a new ball game to play, and we must do that. Otherwise, we'll get left behind. But there's a lot of positivity. We receive a lot of positive feedback. And I think it's the psychology of it. And if we take a collaborative approach, and I think we can get out of these current doldrums, and I think there's already some light at the end of the tunnel. Vinaka, thank you.